Good morning and good afternoon all. Welcome to the webinar from Zazu Enterprises. We'll be discussing how to avoid disaster with digital records information management today. Thanks for joining. My name is Philip Miller. I'm on the sales team here at Zazu, and I've come from the technology space. I've been here for about 10 years, joined the Zazu team last year, and with me is Warren Bean. He's our senior sales engineer. He's been with Zazu Enterprises for about 15 years in all different aspects of the company. He's worked his way up from support through training and now does our full software demonstrations and helps with some programming and integrations on the backside. And as we get started for the webinar today, there's a few housekeeping items that we'd like to discuss quickly. If you want to minimize your GoToMeeting control panel, there's a little red arrow to the left side of that will minimize it. And also during the presentation, we will have all the attendees muted. We see several attendees on there, so we're going to keep those lines muted. And if there are questions as we go along, please type those into the chat bar down at the bottom of the GoToMeeting. I will be monitoring those during the presentation, and then at the end, we will cover the questions and answers. So a quick look at today's agenda. We'll just cover a little bit about Zazu and what we do and who we are. Then we'll jump right into the main topic, avoiding the records information management risk by utilizing digital records and information management processes. We've got an actual case study from one of our clients, and then at the end again we'll cover the questions and answers. A little bit about Zazu. We started back in 1987. So nearly 30 years ago, and we introduced the first full lifecycle records management software of its kind to the market, and since then we've continued to innovate and expand. We have a unique approach to the management of documents and records and how we handle those. We have multiple solutions that are scalable. We offer the complete package from records retention schedules all the way through the end life cycle of records management. We've got hundreds of clients in different industries, the oil and gas, government entities, local cities, financial institutions, as well as pharmaceutical companies, and so forth. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Bean, and he will discuss the main topic of today.
Thank you, Philip. Appreciate the intro, and welcome everyone. Glad to have you here, and we do wish we could have joined you in Houston, but that's part of the reason for today's webinar. We wanted to talk about some of the things that happen when there are natural disasters such as what you experienced just a few weeks ago. So to begin with, we're going to give you a records management snapshot because sometimes the question comes up, well, okay, you're going to talk about physical records, paper and boxes and things, but this is a digital world, so why does that still apply? But what we found is that the industry is still dominated by physical inventory. So people are still managing paper and files and boxes. They're still storing in record centers and basements and all of that, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And in fact, as you can see on the screen here, we've got some statistics showing that, like in the case of the first one there, that 78% of companies are still looking to maintain or increase spending on records and information management. That was in 2013. We find that that's still a trend today. Now, of course, records and information management means that some of that is electronic. It's not all physical. So some of that spend is going to be on electronic records, but we have found that definitely people are still keeping paper, maybe not to the same extent as before, but look at the next survey there, and that is 66% of respondents said that paper was not necessarily decreasing, and in fact, 42% said it was still increasing. So that just came from some stats that we gleaned from the AIM organization. So it's something that's still relevant. We still have lots of people that are having to produce paper for various reasons, whether that is tracking signatures or just having physical document requirements based on retention laws, lots of things that play into that. So that's why we're still talking about physical records today, but we're going to talk about also how that transitions into the digital world. Now, as far as physical records go, there's lots of things that can affect or threaten the records that you have. As you can see on the screen before you, obviously unauthorized access can be a factor, whether that's something internal or external. And obviously it could be malicious, but it can also be inadvertent. We've heard many cases where someone has checked out a box of records legitimately. They have the permission to do so, and then someone else needs that record, so they happily pass that along to be the good neighbor to the cubicle next to them, only to find out that that person was not authorized and those records are now lost because the chain of custody was broken. So there's definitely ways that happens outside of simply malicious intent and someone breaking in and stealing things. But we also have, probably more prevalent, the issue of natural disasters. As you can see, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, there can be fires as well. You can have buildings that collapse. We've heard of stories around that as well. So any number of different things that can happen, whether natural or man-made, things that can affect the physical structure of your records. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about today and how to mitigate that. Now there is one particular type of threat that's the most prevalent still. As you can see on the screen here, this quote from Ohio State University Libraries. The biggest threat to records is still water, whether that's from floods, leaky pipes, or the water from putting out a fire. So fire suppression systems are great. Many of them are dry systems. They use halon gas, but there are still many wet systems in place, still very common, and so the process of preventing a fire can actually destroy records, or at least render them very difficult to use at best. But even in some cases, humidity is a factor. So having a location, say in the south or near the equator, can present huge challenges just to have climate control that will prevent your records from deteriorating too soon. So those are some of the other issues that you deal with when it comes to water. So it's just a very difficult thing to manage, even in today's environment where we think we've got everything controlled. We're going to talk about one specific case study that involves water, Service Corporation International, or SCI, one of our customers. So in fact, on the next slide, we've got some details about the company. They are the largest provider of funeral home and cemetery services in the nation, with over 2,000 cemeteries and funeral homes that they manage and provide services for. And of course, they manage all the records for those as well. So in the case of the records that they're storing, actually as of about 2001, it was about 2.3 million documents that they were storing. And as you can imagine, funeral homes and cemeteries would have all kinds of physical records that they have to keep track of all of the details that they're managing. So they are just right down in Allen Parkway. If you're in Houston, they're just probably down the street from you. You may not have known that they existed, but they've been around since 1962. Quite an impressive company, actually. So in 2001, they were hit with a natural disaster. You may recall, if you were there, that Tropical Storm Allison dumped about 35 inches of rain in the Houston area, flooded all kinds of businesses and residences, did about $2 billion worth of damage, and as you can see here in the last bullet point, it flooded SCI's basement level record center in several feet of water. Of course, destroying all of the records, not completely destroying them, but at least soaking them all thoroughly, and they couldn't even get to the records until those waters receded. So they had a huge problem on their hands. Quite literally a disaster, one that many businesses may not be able to recover from, but they were able to recover, thankfully, at great cost, of course. And so we want to talk about how that recovery occurred, what they did, how we helped them out, and kind of take you through that process. So first of all, their response to that was to, once the waters receded anyway, was to have all of those wet documents and books and so forth taken and packaged up and shipped to the Dallas area, where they were freeze-dried. And the freeze-drying process is pretty fascinating in itself. It's basically putting them in similar to shipping containers where they can be vacuum sealed. The pressure is lowered. They're dropped to a very cold temperature so that all of the moisture inside the documents instantly freezes. And then they have a process called sublimation, where it slowly evaporates the water before it can turn back into liquid form, so that they can, over the process of several weeks, extract all the moisture out of the documents and then go through the process of restoring them. So they were able to do that over quite a long period of time. And while that was taking place, they, of course, needed to have something to track those documents with that was better than what they had to begin with. So they contacted us right around that time to find out what we had available in terms of a system to track all of their physical records and to be able to digitize them. So we implemented our versatile enterprise system and the imaging add-on module of that. And we were able to take all of their legacy data, the information about all of those records that they're storing, all the boxes, files, documents, and import that metadata into the system and set up a scanning system so that as they receive those restored, freeze-dried, and recovered documents back into their record center, they were able to catalog those, to scan them, and basically digitize every piece of paper that they formerly had only kept in physical form. Now, that allowed them to prevent a future loss because not only did they have the recovered documents, but they had the digitized versions as well, so that they were able to have basically a redundant copy of that, obviously stored in a different place. So they also, of course, went through the process of moving their entire record center up to an upper floor, so it's no longer going to be a threat being in a basement level area, so they could mitigate that problem as well. So obviously that was a very long process, quite a huge endeavor, but they learned a lot of lessons in that process as well. So the money that was spent was not completely lost or in vain. They did learn a lot of things through that. For one, prevention is definitely better than reaction. It's always something that we think about after the fact, and we always think that this can't happen to us, but indeed it can happen, and you'll never be forewarned about it. It'll just happen before you know it. And of course, we need to reconsider the whole idea of basement storage. It's very common throughout all the businesses that we talk to see records stored in a basement because it's easy to keep cool. It's typically not a problem in terms of the weight that might be generated by all of the records that you're storing, so you don't have to worry about the structural integrity. And it's typically out of the way, which is often what you want to do with records, is keep them out of the way. But it has some very big disadvantages when it comes to things like water, because there's no place for that water to go unless you've got a very good drainage system. So that was one of the lessons, of course, that they learned. They also learned some of the advantages of keeping records in digital form as well as physical. For one thing, it's a very small footprint. So the space required to keep something in an electronic format, you can do typically on a server or two, maybe some spare drives, and maybe it's a server rack. Maybe it's a cloud storage, but very small footprint compared to a huge record center. And of course, that makes it more easily accessible. So not only did they have the backup and preservation, the duplicate copy or redundant copy of their data, but anyone who now requested a document didn't have to have that delivered physically to their desk and track the return of that. They would be able to search for it within a web browser, find the record, see the digital format, and see the information that they need right there. If needed, even print or download a copy of that for their own purposes. And of course, that can all be secured and managed from an authorization aspect. And also, of course, the lower operating costs. The cost of maintaining real estate, of building, climate control, personnel, security, shelving, all of the details that go along with a record center. That obviously is very expensive, and even more so if you're in a high-density area like, say, New York City or Los Angeles. And so you can really reduce the cost of the overall storage by having them digitized. But it does have disadvantages as well. It's not going to be just a simple matter of, oh, let's just scan it and we're all done. There are high setup costs. You have to have high-end scanners. If you're going to do daily scanning at high volume, you might be looking at scanners that cost anywhere from $10,000 to even $30,000 or $50,000. And if you have a high availability production environment, you might want to have those scanners redundant as well. So you might have to have two of them, because if one breaks down, it might take a day or two to have them repaired. And you don't want to lose the ability to scan those images during that process. All of that depends on your requirements, the volume, and the necessity as far as the accessibility for those devices. There is also the concern about digital format preservation. In other words, what format you scan them into, and will that format be readable in the future? Long-term preservation of digital documents, there are standards set out by NARA, by the Library of Congress. So typically you're looking at something like a TIFF format or PDF/A for the archive format, but you have to make sure that 10, 20, 30 years down the road, you don't have issues with being able to read that format in some new technology or new platform. There's also the issue of quality control, and I think this is often overlooked when it comes to digitizing records. It does sound simple to say, look, just scan these documents and store them on a server. That's all well and good, but the process of scanning is quite detailed and it is quite labor-intensive at times. You have to take the documents, separate them if they are stapled or somehow fastened together, typically sort them into like sizes or categories, maybe separate them by document type. In some cases you have page separators in order to assist with that process. And you have to make sure that when they're scanned, they're readable. A very lightly colored text might not scan appropriately. You may have to adjust the properties, so you may have to scan them more than one time. And then, of course, make sure that they're indexed properly, searchable, say through OCR or metadata that's applied to them. And, of course, categorized properly so that you know when they can be destroyed and make sure that you link them to their physical counterpart. So lots of details come into play there, and it's important to have advice on how to do that and get set up with that process whenever you're going to launch this kind of endeavor. And as you can see at the last bullet point on that page there's still about 70% of organizations that don't currently have a plan to transition to digital records information management, meaning that they're still capturing basically on paper, and they don't have those redundant copies, so they could be subject to those kinds of disasters that they probably think they're not subject to, or at least it hasn't raised it to the level of importance to start that process. Now, there are solutions to this, as we've talked about. There are many companies that deal with scanning, with records management, but there are sometimes difficulties and roadblocks to that process. For example, getting buy-in from the primary stakeholders. You obviously have to meet with them and convince them that this is a worthwhile issue to address, even though it could be costly. So you have to have a good plan in place, statistics and numbers to justify the potential expenditure. So that's something that would have to be the first step in planning this kind of a process. And of course, determining your current state of records, meaning where are your records kept? Are they in the same kind of risk category that may have been experienced by SCI in this case study? Does it warrant doing something as drastic as scanning everything, or are there other strategies you might take into account? And also, of course, having a plan. So not just being able to say, okay, we need to do something, and then start talking to the high-level executives to say, let's get moving, but making a plan that fits within your budget, within your resources that you have available, within a time frame that's reasonable, and also planning out whether you would be scanning everything or just certain types of records. So there's lots of plans that you want to make sure that those are thoroughly mapped out before approaching management. And of course, investing in a good tool, and obviously that's something that we can help out with, but you need a good, flexible, comprehensive tool that can help you categorize, search, find those records, have the workflow that's needed so that once they are scanned, they're not just sitting on a server somewhere where they're not very accessible. You have to have something where users can interact, find the records easily, display them, and then move on and get onto the business at hand. So with that, we would welcome any questions that you might have. As we've gone through this brief case study, we hope that it's been informational. We'd be glad to answer any questions that you have now.
Yes, thanks for that, Warren. That's a great overview of how the digital side of records information management can complement the physical side. And as we went through, there are a couple questions. I think you've answered some of them along the way, but let me just kind of reiterate what some folks have typed in. Okay, these ones go together, so I'll ask this in two parts. They both deal with the stakeholders. You said you mentioned that you need to engage the stakeholders of the company. So the first question would be, do you have recommendations for which departments to reach out to first? And the second part would be, how do you get buy-in from those stakeholders?
Yeah, both very good questions, and some of that will depend on how your current records program is structured. In other words, in some cases, the records and information management program may be structured underneath information technology, or IT. So if that's the case, and since this would definitely involve technology, the first place to go would be the IT director or the head of IT, and be able to map out the plans with that group, because then it would be part of the overall IT infrastructure, because there may already be solutions in place elsewhere in the organizations where scanning takes place, or digitization is taking place, maybe for to other departments, and it may be possible to simply incorporate this process into an existing one. If you are more aligned with, say, the legal or compliance or risk groups, then of course getting buy-in from that area is going to be critical as well, because you can often make a good case, and this kind of ties into the second question, by the way, but you can often make a good case for this kind of a project based on risk mitigation. So if you're dealing with someone in legal or risk, it's often a good argument to say, what would be the consequence of losing these records, or the cost of having to dry them out and digitize them and categorize them after the fact versus being able to do it up front. Likewise, in some cases, the idea of promoting such a project based on risk, it can be effective depending on who you're talking to, but in some cases, it's not the most effective because it's not something that's a current pressing need, it's only the threat of a current pressing need, which doesn't always resonate. Oftentimes we find that simply analyzing what competitors are doing and saying, this XYZ company down the road that does the same business, they've got a records program where they can simply go in and quickly find their records. They're not spending a long time tracking those things down like we have to do. And wow, they look like they're in a lot better shape in terms of their overall organization. And wouldn't it be good to be at least as good as our competitors in terms of our organizational capabilities? So, that peer pressure, the reputation can often be a better way to approach it in terms of getting the buy-in.
Oh, thanks, Warren. That's some good insight there. Another question that came up was on one of the statistics about papers or paper records not decreasing. So in your experience, Warren, what have you seen with your clients? Is there a shift in either direction?
Well, we definitely have seen over the past few years more and more emphasis on going paperless. That phrase has been talked about for many years, but it seems like it's finally starting to come to the point where people are making strong initiatives to go paperless. They're in some cases disallowing employees to create paper records, not having as many printers available and so on. But for a long time, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, it seemed like paper was actually increasing because of the ease with which people could print. But now with the advent of more mobile devices and tablets, the need to print is not as prevalent because you can now view things on your mobile devices, your phones, your tablets, take those into meetings, so you don't always have to, say, print out that document that you're going to review at the next board meeting, for example. And so we are definitely seeing at least a flattening out of the demand for tracking paper, and in some cases we're seeing it start to reduce, but in no way are we seeing that it's going away entirely, because there are many records that have to be kept permanently in physical format based on current retention laws. So that's kind of where we're seeing it in the industry now.
Excellent, thank you. And I think with that wraps up the questions that we have available. Just in closing, we will send out this case study. We've got a white paper on it. We can send that out to all the attendees, hopefully either later today or this week. But thanks again for joining. We apologize for not being able to make it down to the second round of ARMA in Houston. Hopefully this has proved helpful and beneficial for you and your organizations. If there are any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. My email is on the screen as well as my phone number, and we will be here to help. But with that, thank you, Warren, for the case study, and thank you to all the attendees for today, and we will close down and talk to you soon.